It's time to move on because we've got a lot of other issues to cover tonight. Our next question comes from Stephen Menadue.
Premier, I've had an addiction to electronic gaming machines for several decades. I've lost everything, my family, my son, and I've spent many years in jail. I continue to struggle with gambling because the poorer areas where I live are saturated with pokies. On the two occasions that the pokies that I've fallen in the last year in my abstinence, trying to get away from them, I deliberately applied the basic premise of the pre-commitment system, which is stating how much one will spend before they spend. By utilising the rule that says you can only have one ATM withdrawal at a hotel. On those two occasions that I did bust, I walked out without spending all my money. The first time in my life. My question is Tasmania too addicted to its enormous gambling revenue to trial the pre-commitment system?
Stephen, before I go to the panel, Very briefly, before I go to the panel, what do you mean you tried the principle of pre-commitment? Because no such thing exists at this point.
The idea that the pre-commitment system says that you will nominate an amount before you go and gamble. Before I went and gambled on those occasions, I knew how much money I had and I nominated by only taking that money out of the auto teller because I could not go back to that auto teller.
So can I interrupt you? You did it by willpower. Is that right, on that occasion? Would that work as a permanent solution?
If you're ready to stop, it will. And I'm ready to stop, and I was. But I do believe the pre-commitment system will help people to think in those clearer moments.
OK, good. Let's hear from our panel on this. Peter Cundall.
Well, we're broadcasting from a casino. And if anybody's bothered to go into the rooms there that are full of these poker machines and wandered around as I did earlier, I couldn't imagine a more depressing sight than to see people there, sitting there, not wealthy people from the look of them, just sitting there, putting their money in and losing it because these machines are designed to win. There's no question about that. But they're also designed to seduce people who are tempted to think that somehow they're going to make some money, right? I believe they have to be controlled. The amount of money that's being spent in Tasmania or wasted in Tasmania on these machines is enough to build a couple of hospitals every year to solve a great deal of the financial problems of this state.
Melanie.
I think there always needs to be well thought out harm minimisation strategies.
Including government regulation on how much you can actually gamble?
I'm not in favour of Big Brother solutions. I know that sounds like an easy cop-out answer, Tony, but I don't believe in big government. I believe in individuals making their own decisions, and that applies to a whole gamut.
But you believe in speed limits, I imagine, in cars and wearing seat belts? And
I do.
There are certain rules.
I do, and I think that's a good response.
That's not a Big Brother solution, though.
I suppose it is to some point, but in my opinion, and it's my opinion only, and at the moment, the gambling's not illegal in Tasmania, and those pre-commitment strategies are not legislated. And
how do you feel when you hear stories about people that have lost everything, right? They've got themselves into massive debt, right? And the whole family, everybody is suffering, and it could be controlled. Right, because it's true that you like to give you've got confidence in the individual, but individuals are different, and some are stronger than others. I've never gambled in my life. It's like taking your wages and putting them down the nearest grid, as far as I'm concerned. But everybody's not like that.
You should have that opportunity to make that decision.
But what about other people that are not necessarily as strong? right? I mean, don't you feel that some people need to be protected?
I've acted for people that have had people steal money from them, that have come from gambling addiction. And it is the most devastating thing to have to help someone reconstruct their business when someone has stolen from them in that specific situation.
Let me interrupt and let's hear from the Premier on this. The question was originally directed to you, and I'll come back to our question because he'd like to make a comment. But will you introduce pre-commitment here, or are you going to sit around and wait for the federal government to make a decision on this?
We've been working at that national level with all the other states and the Commonwealth around a mandatory pre-commitment scheme, and Tasmania has been one of those states that's actually been supporting Jenny Macklin in her role in trying to get mandatory pre-commitment up. We certainly were asked whether or not Tasmania would have a trial of mandatory pre-commitment here. And I spoke to industry about that, and I told them about the pros of that it would mean that they would get federal government money that would help them to transfer their machines over to be adaptable to pre-commitment, and that there would be a lot of other support coming from the Australian government to make sure the trial was successful. Now, they said to me they weren't interested, that they were too concerned about the impact on the business that might not be recoverable after a trial that may or may not lead to something. Now, that was their decision to say they wouldn't cooperate with such a trial.
We're talking about government regulation, though, aren't we? Can't you just simply decide to do it?
Well, we could. Of course you could. But to me, I think to actually have a trial work and be successful, you need to have cooperation of those who are actually going to implement the trial for you. So we are certainly very supportive of the work that's been happening. We've been watching very closely the work of Andrew Wilkie and others with the Senate committee, and are interested in the fact that they themselves now have come up with a recommendation to treat low-intensity machines differently to the high-intensity machines. I think if we keep the conversation going, we'll get a sensible outcome, because we don't want to see people who do have a tendency to fall into addiction, whatever that addiction may well be. We want to be able to provide them with support. But we also want to make sure that we do enable people to have freedom of choice too. And I equally know of pensioners, for instance, who this is their social outing. We ourselves may not like gambling, but for them it's their social outing. So we need support to try to prevent problem gamblers from slipping into that, but we also need to ensure that we have some system that enables people to participate in something they find entertaining.
All right, we've got quite a few questions to go through. Let's try and keep our answers brief if we can, and we've got someone with their hand up down the front there. We'll wait till we get a microphone to you. Yep. Go ahead.
Just a comment about what the Premier said in relation to the older people, and that is their social outing. I think that's a bit of an indictment upon our community and our society if the only outing they have is to go and play the tokies.
And we'll quickly go back to our questioner, Stephen. You wanted to make a comment yourself, I think.
I would like the opportunity to present the other side of the coin to you at some point, or somebody who really wants to hear. Because I believe there's people at home aren't watching this show tonight because the vibe in the house is so bad because there's no money in the house. I've said it before, and people think it's an emotional argument, but there are children suffering in our suburbs because those poker machines are put in the suburbs to attract the people who had the problems. 40% of their profits come from problem gamblers. Okay, it's that simple.
Let's see if Eric Abetz wants to get on board for a commitment.
I've had a look at a few of the studies that have been done in relation to pre-commitment. Nova Scotia seems to be one of the world leaders in this area, and the unfortunate results from some of the research is that those that have a real difficulty and a real attraction to the poker machines, 37% of them somehow get somebody else's pre-commitment card or are able to get around the problem. And whilst I personally don't believe in a nanny state, I have seen the situation that Stephen and Peter have referred to of families in absolute destitution, but I then ask myself, Can that happen as a result of a poor business decision where no money is left on the table? Can money be lost at the horse races, on the roulette wheel, etc., etc.? And the answer is yes, yes, yes to all of them. So I ask the question, why then do we pick on poker machines? Chances are that is the worst. That is the worst.
Didn't you hear at least part of that answer from our questioner?
Oh, yes. And I agree that it is, chances are, one of the worst forms of gambling, but we do know of people that also have lost their money on the horses or on roulette wheels, etc. And so how do we overcome when somebody really wants to gamble? And as the studies in Nova Scotia have shown, people are able to get around the pre-commitment unless you go the whole hog and go biometric.
Right.
And I'm not sure that people would necessarily agree to that.
Christine Milne wants to get in here. Keep your answer brief if you can.
Well, this is an addiction. This is the big problem. It's obviously, if you go and ask the people who are making a fortune out of the poker machines, do they want pre-commitment, they're going to say no because they want to protect their profits. But I agree, we should be going and talking to the community that is being so adversely impacted by addiction to gambling. Now, we treat addiction whether it's alcoholism, we're trying to treat addiction when it comes to smoking. This is an addiction. It is a cancer in our community, and we should be doing everything we can. The biggest problem in Tasmania is the extent to which revenue is now based on the misery of other people, and that is in terms of the state coffers, and it's the same right around the country, and it's why governments aren't now prepared to really get stuck into this social problem. It's because of the income stream, and that is a tragedy.
Right. Just before...
If I could say that Tasmania's actually been leading the way on a lot of the reforms around gambling, and our gambling revenues are reducing. And we know by supporting the likes of a mandatory pre-commitment scheme, which we are, that our revenues will continue to go down. So this mythology that we hear of us being addicted to gambling revenue is just not right.
All right, just on the question of gambling revenue, I've got to bring you in here, Melanie Kerrison, because I've had a tweet suggesting that you and your husband own a pub that has gaming machines. So first of all, is that true?
We do not.
Okay, well then we've established that that's not correct, and I thank you for that.